The dust hung thick in the air as Zachary Crawford rode into Clifton, Arizona territory, on a sweltering June afternoon in 1878, his horse nearly stumbling from exhaustion after 3 days of hard riding through the desert. And all he wanted was water, whiskey, and maybe a place to rest his head before moving on to wherever the wind took him next. He had been running for the better part of 2 years now, not from the law exactly, but from memories that chased him harder than any posse ever could. The war had ended more than a decade ago, but some scars never fully healed, and Zachary had learned that staying in one place too long meant facing demons he would rather keep at bay. So he drifted, taking work where he could find it, branding cattle, breaking horses, sometimes riding shotgun on stage coaches when the pay was decent enough. Clifton was smaller than he had expected, just a scattering of buildings clustered along the San Francisco River, with copper mines dotting the surrounding hills. The town had sprung up quickly, drawn by the promise of mineral wealth buried deep in the earth, and it still had that rough, unfinished quality common to frontier settlements. Most of the buildings were simple wood construction, hastily thrown together by men more interested in getting rich than in putting down roots. Zachary guided his horse toward what looked like a livery stable at the edge of town. The sun beat down mercilessly, and he could feel sweat trickling down his back beneath his dusty shirt. A man emerged from the stable, wiping his hands on an already filthy rag, squinting up at Zachary with the practiced assessment of someone who sized up strangers for a living. "Help you?" the man asked, his voice gravelly from too much tobacco and desert air. "Need to stable my horse for a few days," Zachary said, dismounting with a wince. His legs protested after so many hours in the saddle, and he took a moment to steady himself. "She needs water, feed, and a good rub-down." "I will pay extra if you treat her well." The stable hand nodded, taking the reins. "4 bits a day, and that includes everything. There is a boarding house 2 streets over if you need a room. Miss Martha runs it. Tell her Thomas sent you." Zachary paid the man and grabbed his saddlebags, slinging them over his shoulder. The weight felt heavier than usual, but then again, everything felt heavier these days. He made his way through the dusty streets, noting the saloon, the general store, a small restaurant, and surprisingly, a church. It was a simple structure, hardly more than a large room with a cross mounted above the door, but it stood out among the rougher establishments that surrounded it. He found the boarding house without difficulty. It was a 2-story building that looked slightly more permanent than most of the others, with actual glass windows and a coat of whitewash that had probably been applied within the last year. A sign hanging from the porch proclaimed it to be Martha's rooms, with rates listed below. The woman who answered his knock was in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked him up and down, taking in his dusty clothes, the gun at his hip, and the tired lines around his eyes. "I have 1 room available," she said before he could speak. "Upstairs faces east, so you will get morning sun. $2 a week, payable in advance. That includes breakfast and supper. No drinking in the rooms, no women, and no fighting. You cause trouble, you are out. Understood?" "Yes, madam," Zachary said, unable to suppress a slight smile at her directness. He liked people who did not waste time with unnecessary pleasantries. "That sounds fine." He paid her for 2 weeks, figuring that would give him enough time to decide whether Clifton held any opportunities worth staying for. Martha showed him to his room, which was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chair near the window. It was more than he usually had, and certainly better than sleeping on the ground. After she left, Zachary stripped off his shirt and washed as best he could with the pitcher and basin provided. The water turned brown almost immediately, and he made a mental note to ask about a bathhouse. He changed into a slightly cleaner shirt, strapped his gun back on, and headed out to explore the town properly. The afternoon was wearing into evening by the time he finished walking the length of Clifton's Main Street. He had learned that the copper mines were hiring, though the work was brutal and dangerous. There was also a ranch about 10 miles north that needed hands, and the general store owner mentioned that the stagecoach line was looking for drivers willing to make the dangerous run between Clifton and Silver City. Zachary was considering his options when he noticed the church again. The door stood open, and on impulse, he walked toward it. He had not been inside a church since before the war, had not felt much like praying since he had seen what men could do to each other in the name of causes and flags. But something drew him forward anyway, perhaps just curiosity, or maybe a half-forgotten memory of a time when faith had seemed less complicated. The interior was dim and cool after the blazing heat outside. Rough-hewn benches served as pews, and a simple wooden cross hung at the front. The space smelled of dust and candle wax, with undertones of wood and desert air. It was peaceful in a way that Zachary had almost forgotten places could be. Then he saw her. She knelt in the front pew, her head bowed, hands clasped before her. Even from the back, he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her whole body seemed drawn tight with whatever burden she carried. Her dark hair was pinned up, though a few strands had escaped to curl against her neck. She wore a simple gray dress that had been mended in several places, and her boots, visible beneath the hem, were scuffed and worn. Zachary knew he should leave, knew that she clearly wanted privacy for her prayers, but something stopped him. He had spent so long running from connection, from anything that might tie him to a place or a person. But in that moment, watching this woman pray with such obvious intensity, he felt something shift inside him. He walked slowly down the aisle, his boots making soft sounds on the wooden floor. She did not turn, too lost in her prayers to notice his approach. When he reached her pew, he hesitated for just a moment, then lowered himself to kneel beside her. Before he could question the impulse, he reached out and took her hand. She gasped, her eyes flying open, and turned to look at him with an expression of such startled vulnerability that Zachary almost pulled away. But her hand, though it trembled in his, did not withdraw, and up close he could see that her face was wet with tears. "I am sorry," he said quietly, his voice rough with disuse. "I did not mean to intrude. I just saw you here alone, and you looked like maybe you could use someone to pray with." She stared at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face as if trying to determine whether he was real or some figment of her desperate imagination. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black in the dim light of the church, and there were shadows beneath them that spoke of too many sleepless nights. "You do not even know me," she whispered. "You do not know what I have done." "I do not need to know," Zachary said, and meant it. "We all carry things we wish we did not. Sometimes it helps to know you are not carrying them alone." A sob caught in her throat, and then suddenly she was gripping his hand with both of hers, holding on as if he were the only thing keeping her from drowning. Zachary shifted closer, letting her hold on as tightly as she needed to, and bowed his head beside hers. He had not prayed in years, had forgotten most of the words that used to come so easily in his childhood. But he found himself speaking anyway, soft words about strength and forgiveness and hope, and whether they were prayers or just wishes spoken aloud hardly seemed to matter. What mattered was the woman beside him, the way her breathing gradually slowed, the way some of the terrible tension began to ease from her shoulders. They stayed like that until the light through the windows had faded to purple twilight. Finally, she released his hand and sat back, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice steadier now. "You did not have to do that." "I know," Zachary said. He sat back as well, giving her space, but remained beside her on the hard wooden bench. "I am Zachary Crawford. I just rode into town this afternoon." "Nora Mercer," she said, and he noticed the way she hesitated slightly before giving her name, as if considering whether to lie. "I have been in Clifton for about 6 months now. You want to tell me why you were crying?" he asked gently. "Or would you rather I mind my own business?" Nora looked down at her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap. Her fingers were work-roughened, with calluses that spoke of hard labor. "I suppose if you were kind enough to sit with me, you deserve some explanation." "I came to Clifton running from something. Someone, actually. My husband." Zachary felt something sink in his chest. Of course she was married. A woman like her would be, but Nora continued, "Former husband, I should say, though I am not sure the law would see it that way. I left him 8 months ago, took what little money I had saved and ran. He was not a good man, Mr. Crawford. He had a temper, and when he drank, which was often, he used his fists to make his points." She touched her left arm unconsciously, and Zachary saw the ghost of old bruises there, faded to yellow-green beneath her sleeve. "I am sorry," he said, and the inadequacy of the words frustrated him. "No one should have to live like that." "I stayed too long as it was," Nora said bitterly. "Kept thinking he would change, that if I just tried harder, did things right, he would go back to being the man I thought I married. But people do not change, do they? Not really." "Some do," Zachary said thoughtfully, "but not because someone else wants them to. They have to want it for themselves." Nora nodded slowly. "I realized that too late. By the time I left, I was so worn down I barely recognized myself anymore. I took a stagecoach as far as my money would get me, and that turned out to be Clifton. I have been working at the restaurant, washing dishes and helping cook. It is honest work, and the owner, Mr. Chen, he does not ask too many questions. But today I got word that my husband has been asking about me. Someone saw a man matching his description in Silver City, showing my photograph around, offering money for information." "That is why you were praying," Zachary said. "You are afraid he is getting close." "Terrified," Nora admitted. "If he finds me, he will drag me back, or worse. He swore when we married that I belonged to him until death, and he is the type of man who means what he says." Zachary was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "What if you did not face him alone?" Nora looked at him sharply. "Mr. Crawford, I cannot ask that of you. We just met." "You do not owe me anything." "I know I do not owe you anything," Zachary said, "but maybe I want to help anyway. I am good in a fight and I do not scare easy. If this man comes looking for you, he will find more than he bargained for." "Why would you do this?" Nora asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You do not know me. For all you know, I could be lying about everything." Zachary considered her question seriously. Why was he doing this? He had spent years avoiding exactly this kind of entanglement, staying on the move so he would never have to care about anyone or anything. But something about Nora called to him, something beyond her obvious distress or even her beauty. Perhaps it was recognition, one wounded soul seeing another. "Because when I walked in here and saw you praying, you looked like I have felt for a long time," he finally said. "Lost and alone and trying to find something to hold on to. And I thought maybe if I could help you, it might help me too. Does that make sense?" "More than you know," Nora said softly. She studied his face in the gathering darkness, and he let her look, did not try to hide the scars that the years had carved into him, both visible and otherwise. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. "All right, Mr. Crawford. If you are serious about this, then I accept your help. God knows I could use it. Call me Zachary, he said, standing and offering her his hand. If we are going to be allies, we might as well use first names. Zachary, she repeated, letting him help her to her feet. Her hand was small and warm in his, and he was reluctant to let it go. Then you should call me Nora. They walked out of the church together into the cool desert evening. The sky was ablaze with stars, more than Zachary had ever seen back east, scattered across the darkness like diamonds on black velvet. Clifton's few lights glowed in windows along the main street, and somewhere a dog barked, the sound carrying in the still air. "Where are you staying?" Zachary asked as they paused outside the church. "I have a small room behind the restaurant," Nora said. "It is not much, but it is mine and it is safe, or it was until today." "Then let me walk you there," Zachary said. "And tomorrow we should talk about what to do if your husband shows up." "It is better to have a plan." Nora hesitated, then nodded. "The restaurant is this way." They walked through the quiet streets, and Zachary found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him. She was of average height, which meant the top of her head came to about his shoulder, and she moved with a quiet grace despite her obvious exhaustion. He wondered what her life had been like before her marriage, before the violence and fear. There was intelligence in her eyes, and a strength that had somehow survived despite everything trying to break it. The restaurant was a small building with Chinese characters painted on the sign alongside the English words Chen's Fine Dining, though Zachary suspected fine was a generous description. Nora led him around to the back, where a narrow staircase climbed to a door on the second floor. "This is me," she said, stopping at the base of the stairs. "Thank you for walking with me, and for what you did in the church. I do not think I could have faced another night alone with my fears." "You do not have to face anything alone anymore," Zachary said, "at least not while I am here." Nora smiled, and it transformed her face, giving him a glimpse of what she must have looked like before life had taught her to be afraid. "Good night, Zachary." "Good night, Nora." He waited until she had climbed the stairs and disappeared inside before turning back toward the boarding house. His mind was racing with plans and possibilities, but underneath it all was something he had not felt in a long time: purpose. He had someone to protect now, a reason to stay in one place instead of drifting on to the next town. It should have terrified him, should have sent him running for his horse and the open trail. Instead, it felt like coming home. The next morning, Zachary woke to sunlight streaming through his window and the smell of bacon drifting up from downstairs. He dressed quickly and headed down to the dining room, where several other boarders were already eating breakfast. Martha moved between the tables with practiced efficiency, carrying plates loaded with eggs, bacon, and thick slices of bread. "Sleep well?" she asked as she set a plate in front of him. "Better than I have in months," Zachary admitted. "Thank you for the room." "Just follow the rules and we will get along fine," Martha said, but there was a hint of warmth in her voice that softened the words. After breakfast, Zachary made his way to the restaurant. It was early still, and the few people on the street moved with the slow deliberation of those facing another hot day of hard work. He found Nora in the kitchen, her sleeves rolled up as she scrubbed a large pot. She looked up when he entered, and he saw relief flash across her face before she schooled it back to calm. "Zachary, I was not sure you would come." "I said I would help, and I meant it," he said. "Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" Nora glanced toward the front of the restaurant, where Mr. Chen was setting up for the day. "Give me a few minutes to finish this, and we can walk down by the river." Zachary waited, watching her work. She moved with quick efficiency, her hands steady despite the tension he could see in her shoulders. When she finished, she dried her hands on her apron, exchanged a few words in Cantonese with Mr. Chen, and led Zachary out the back door. The San Francisco River was more of a creek at this time of year, sluggish and low between its banks. They found a spot in the shade of some cottonwood trees, and Nora sat on a flat rock, smoothing her skirts around her. "Tell me about your husband," Zachary said, settling on a rock nearby. "If I am going to help you, I need to know what we are dealing with." Nora was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the slow-moving water. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled, as if she were reciting facts rather than her own painful history. "His name is Robert Thorpe. We married 5 years ago when I was 18. I met him in St. Louis where I was working as a seamstress. He was charming at first, attentive, generous with compliments and small gifts. My mother had died the year before, and I had no other family. I think I was lonely, and he seemed like an answer to problems I did not know how else to solve." She picked up a small stone and turned it over in her fingers. "The violence did not start right away. First it was just his temper, flashes of anger that he would apologize for afterward. Then it was controlling where I went, who I talked to. By the time he first hit me, 6 months into our marriage, I was already so isolated that I had no one to turn to, and he was always so sorry afterward, swearing it would never happen again." "But it did," Zachary said quietly. "Again and again," Nora confirmed. "Each time a little worse than the last. He would break my things, favorite possessions from my mother to punish me for imagined slights. He controlled all the money, gave me barely enough to buy food. I tried to leave twice before, but he found me both times. The second time he broke 2 of my ribs and locked me in our bedroom for a week." Zachary felt rage building in his chest, a hot, fierce thing that demanded action. He forced himself to breathe slowly to stay calm. Nora needed his help, not his anger. "How did you finally get away?" he asked. "He went to Chicago for business, said he would be gone for 2 weeks. I had been saving coins for months, hiding them in a hole I dug in the floor beneath our bed. It was not much, but it was enough for a stagecoach ticket. I waited until he had been gone for 3 days to make sure he was not coming back early, and then I left. I took only what I could carry in a small bag, left everything else behind. I knew he would come after me eventually, but I hoped that if I went far enough, changed my name, he might never find me." "But now you think he is close," Zachary said. Nora nodded. "The man who saw him in Silver City said Robert was offering a substantial reward for information about a woman matching my description. He is determined, Zachary. He will not stop until he finds me, and when he does, I do not think he will settle for just taking me back. He will want to make me pay for leaving. Then we make sure he does not find you," Zachary said. "Or if he does, we make sure you are not alone when it happens." "How?" Nora asked, and there was a note of desperation in her voice. "He is not the kind of man who will be scared off by a warning. And even if you are good in a fight, Robert is dangerous. He has killed before, I think. There were times when he would disappear for days and come back with blood on his clothes that he said was from hunting, but I was never sure." Zachary thought for a moment. "Does anyone in Clifton know your real name?" "No. I have been using my mother's maiden name, Mercer. As far as anyone here knows, I am a widow who came west looking for a fresh start." "Good. That is good. And you have changed your appearance." "I cut my hair shorter and dyed it darker. I used to have lighter brown hair, almost auburn in the sun, and I wear different style clothing than I used to, but I do not know if that will be enough if he is asking the right questions." "It might buy us some time," Zachary said. "Here is what we do. I will put the word out that I am looking for work as a bodyguard or hired gun. I will make it known that I am staying in Clifton for the foreseeable future. If your husband comes to town, he will be a stranger asking questions, and that will make people notice him. Meanwhile, I will make sure someone is always watching out for you. When you are working, I will be nearby. When you walk home, I will walk with you." "You cannot dedicate every hour to protecting me," Nora protested. "You need to work to make money for yourself." "I have enough saved to last a while," Zachary said. It was not entirely true, but he would figure something out. "Besides, I can pick up work that keeps me in town. I saw they are hiring at the copper mine." "It is dangerous work, but the pay is good, and the shifts are short enough that I could still watch over you." Nora looked at him with something like wonder. "Why are you doing all this? Really? There has to be more to it than what you said last night." Zachary met her eyes, those dark, haunted eyes that somehow still held hope. "Because I spent 10 years fighting in a war that was supposed to be about principles and freedom, and when it was over, I realized I had not actually saved anyone who mattered. I was just a cog in a machine of violence. Since then, I have been drifting, trying to outrun the feeling that my life does not mean anything. But this helping you, it means something. It is a choice I am making, not orders I am following. Does that make sense?" "Yes," Nora said softly. "It makes perfect sense." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the river flow past. Zachary found himself studying Nora's profile, the delicate line of her jaw, the way the morning sun caught in her dark hair. She was beautiful, but it was more than that. There was something about her that made him want to be better than he had been, to prove that he could be the kind of man who kept his promises. "I should get back to work," Nora finally said, standing and brushing dust from her skirts. "Mr. Chen is kind, but he does expect me to actually work for my wages." "I will come by at the end of your shift," Zachary said. "Walk you home." "You do not have to do that every day," Nora said, but he could see that she wanted him to, that the idea of not being alone brought her comfort. "I want to," Zachary said simply. "Get used to it." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "You are a stubborn man, Zachary Crawford." "You have no idea," he said, smiling back. Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Zachary took a job at the copper mine, working the early morning shift that ended around noon. The work was brutal, swinging a pickaxe in the confined spaces of the mine shafts, breathing air thick with dust and sweat. But the physical exhaustion was almost welcome. It kept his mind occupied and his body tired enough to sleep at night. After his shift ended, he would clean up as best he could and make his way to the restaurant. Sometimes Nora would be able to take a break, and they would sit together in the small yard behind the building, talking about everything and nothing. Other times she was too busy, and Zachary would simply find a spot where he could keep an eye on the entrance while appearing to mind his own business. He learned more about her during those conversations. She had grown up in a small town in Missouri, the only child of a seamstress mother and a father who had died when Nora was young. She had loved books as a child, had dreamed of becoming a teacher before circumstances forced her to find work instead. She had a quick wit and a quiet sense of humor that caught him off guard, making him laugh more than he had in years. In turn, he told her about his own past, though he edited some of the darker parts. He told her about growing up on a farm in Tennessee, about joining the Confederate Army at 16 because everyone else was doing it, and it had seemed like an adventure. He did not tell her about the things he had seen and done during the war, the faces that still haunted his dreams, but she seemed to understand without being told that there were wounds there that had never properly healed. "You have any family left?" she asked one afternoon as they sat by the river, their feet dangling near the water. "A sister, last I heard," Zachary said. "She married a shopkeeper in Atlanta after the war. We exchange letters once or twice a year, but we are not close. The war changed me too much." When I went home on leave, I could see it in her eyes, the fear. She did not recognize me anymore, did not know what to say to the stranger wearing her brother's face. "That is sad," Nora said quietly, "to lose your family even when they are still alive." "What about you?" Zachary asked. "Any relatives somewhere who might be worried about you?" "No one," Nora said. "My mother was an only child, and my father's family disowned him when he married below his station. It was just the two of us after he died, my mother and me. When she passed, I truly was alone. I think that is part of why I fell for Robert's charm so easily. I was desperate for someone to belong to." "You do not belong to anyone but yourself," Zachary said firmly. "No matter what some piece of paper says, no matter what vows were spoken, you are your own person, Nora." She looked at him with eyes that glistened with unshed tears. "I am starting to believe that when I am with you. You make me feel strong again, like the person I used to be before Robert broke her down." Zachary reached out and took her hand, the gesture now familiar after that first time in the church. "You were always strong. You survived, did not you? You got away. That took more courage than most people ever have to find." Nora turned her hand in his, interlacing their fingers. The touch sent warmth through Zachary's chest, a feeling that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. He was falling for her, had been since that moment in the church, maybe. It terrified him and exhilarated him in equal measure. 3 weeks passed without any sign of Robert Thorpe. Zachary began to hope that maybe the man had given up, had decided his runaway wife was not worth the trouble of tracking across half the country. But he knew better than to let his guard down completely. Men like Thorpe did not give up easily, especially when their pride was at stake. It was a Thursday evening when trouble finally arrived. Zachary was waiting outside the restaurant for Nora's shift to end when he noticed a stranger riding into town. There was nothing unusual about that in itself. Clifton saw its share of drifters and prospectors and men looking for work. But something about this man set off alarm bells in Zachary's mind. He was well-dressed, too well-dressed for a mining town, with a tailored suit and polished boots. He sat his horse with the confidence of a man used to being obeyed, and his eyes scanned the street with predatory interest. When his gaze passed over the restaurant, Zachary saw him pause, then pull out a small photograph from his pocket and study it. Zachary felt his blood run cold. This had to be Robert Thorpe. He moved quickly, slipping inside the restaurant. Nora was wiping down tables, and she looked up with a smile when he entered, a smile that died when she saw his expression. "What is wrong?" she asked immediately. "I think your husband just rode into town," Zachary said quietly. "Is there a back way out of here?" The color drained from Nora's face. "Yes, through the kitchen. Are you sure it is him? Man in a fancy suit studying a photograph outside your restaurant. I would bet money on it." Nora looked around frantically, and Zachary could see panic taking hold. He took her shoulders gently but firmly. "Nora, look at me. We have a plan, remember? You are going to go upstairs to your room, lock the door, and stay quiet. I am going to handle this." "You cannot confront him," Nora said urgently. "He will kill you, Zachary. He has no conscience, no honor." "Neither do I when it comes to protecting people I care about," Zachary said. "Now go. Trust me." Nora hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. She squeezed his hand once hard and disappeared into the kitchen. Zachary heard her footsteps on the back stairs and then silence. He stepped back outside just as Robert Thorpe was dismounting from his horse. Up close, the man was exactly what Zachary had expected. Handsome in a cold way, with calculating eyes and a mouth set in a perpetual sneer of superiority. He tied his horse to the hitching post and turned toward the restaurant entrance. Zachary positioned himself casually in the doorway, blocking entry without appearing to. "Evening," he said pleasantly. "Can I help you with something?" Thorpe looked him up and down, clearly taking in the dust-caked work clothes and the gun at Zachary's hip. "I am looking for someone. Perhaps you have seen her." He held out the photograph. Even upside down, Zachary could see it was Nora, though her hair was lighter and her face fuller, less worn. She was smiling in the picture, but it did not reach her eyes. "Pretty woman," Zachary said, not touching the photograph. "What is she to you?" "My wife," Thorpe said, and there was steel beneath the civilized tone. "She left our home some months ago. I have been searching for her, worried that something terrible might have happened. I had word she might have passed through this area." "Lots of people pass through Clifton," Zachary said. "Mining town. Folks come and go all the time." "But you have not seen her," Thorpe pressed. "I am offering a substantial reward for information leading to her whereabouts. $50 in gold to anyone who can help me find my beloved wife." $50 was a small fortune, enough to tempt most men in a place like Clifton. Zachary saw the calculation in Thorpe's eyes, the expectation that money would loosen tongues. "Sorry, friend," Zachary said. "Have not seen anyone matching that description. Like I said, lots of folks come through. Hard to keep track of them all." Something dangerous flickered in Thorpe's expression. "I was not asking you, friend. I was asking anyone who might have information. Now step aside." "Restaurant is closed for the evening," Zachary said, not moving. "Owner is cleaning up. You can come back tomorrow if you are hungry." "I do not want food," Thorpe said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. "I want my wife, and I think you know where she is." Zachary let his hand rest casually on his gun belt. "I think you should move along, find a hotel, get some rest. Clifton is not a friendly town for people who cause trouble." Thorpe's hand moved toward his own weapon, but before either of them could draw, a new voice cut through the tension. "Evening, gentlemen. Is there a problem here?" Zachary glanced over to see Sheriff Tom Winters approaching. The lawman was in his 40s, with a weathered face and shrewd eyes that missed little. Zachary had met him once during his first week in Clifton, a brief introduction that had established mutual respect if not friendship. "No problem, Sheriff," Zachary said easily. "This gentleman was just looking for the hotel." "Is that right?" Winters asked, looking at Thorpe with open suspicion. "Because it looked to me like you two were about to draw on each other." Thorpe smoothed his expression into something more civil. "A misunderstanding. I am looking for my wife who has gone missing. I am concerned for her safety. This man was not being particularly helpful." "Your wife, you say?" Winters crossed his arms. "You have some kind of proof of that? Marriage certificate, maybe?" "Not with me," Thorpe admitted. "But I have her photograph." He showed it to the sheriff. Winters studied it for a long moment. "Cannot say I have seen her, but like Crawford here said, lots of folks pass through. If she did come this way, she is probably long gone by now. You might try Silver City or maybe head south toward Tucson." Thorpe's jaw clenched, and Zachary could see him fighting to maintain his composure. "Perhaps I will spend a few days here, ask around. Someone must have seen her." "Free country," Winters said. "Just make sure you keep things peaceful. We do not tolerate violence in Clifton, no matter what your grievance might be." "Of course, Sheriff," Thorpe said, managing a tight smile. "I am a law-abiding citizen. I simply want to find my wife and take her home where she belongs." The way he said belongs made Zachary's skin crawl, and he saw a flicker of disgust cross the sheriff's face as well. Winters might not know the full story, but he clearly recognized the type of man he was dealing with. "Hotel is 2 streets over," Winters said, pointing. "Martha runs a clean establishment." Thorpe nodded curtly, shot one more searching look at Zachary, and led his horse away. The two men watched him go in silence. "Want to tell me what that was really about?" Winters asked quietly once Thorpe was out of earshot. Zachary considered how much to reveal. The woman in that photograph is hiding from him. He was not a kind husband. She came to Clifton looking for a fresh start, and I am making sure she gets it." Winters was quiet for a moment. "That woman have a name. She goes by Nora Mercer here. And that is all I am going to say about it." The sheriff studied him thoughtfully. "You know, there is no law that says a woman has to stay with a man who beats her. I have seen enough of that ugliness to know it when I see it. But I also cannot arrest a man for looking for his wife, even if his reasons are not pure." "I understand that, Sheriff. I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. I am just asking you to maybe not help him too much in his search." "Son, I have been a lawman for 20 years, and the one thing I have learned is that the law and justice are not always the same thing. I will keep my eyes open. If this Thorpe fellow steps out of line, I will handle it, but I cannot run him out of town just for being here." "That is all I am asking," Zachary said, "and I appreciate it." Winters clapped him on the shoulder. "You watch yourself, Crawford. Men like that, they do not fight fair when they do not get what they want." "Neither do I," Zachary said grimly. After the sheriff left, Zachary waited a few more minutes to make sure Thorpe was not circling back, then slipped around to the back of the restaurant and climbed the stairs to Nora's room. He knocked softly. "It is me, Zachary." The door opened immediately and Nora pulled him inside, her face pale with fear. "Was it him?" "Yes," Zachary said, "but we handled it for now. He is staying at the hotel, going to spend a few days asking around." Nora sank onto her narrow bed, her hands shaking. "He is not going to stop. He will search every building, question every person. Someone will tell him about me eventually." "Not if we make sure they do not," Zachary said. He pulled the room's single chair over and sat facing her. "Nora, I need you to listen to me. You are not going back with him. That is not going to happen, but we need to be smart about this." "What do you mean?" "I mean we need to think about what comes next. Even if we run him off this time, he will just come back or hire someone else to keep looking. You will spend the rest of your life running, never able to settle, always afraid." "I know," Nora whispered. "I have thought about that. Sometimes I think maybe I should just face him, accept whatever punishment he thinks I deserve, at least then it would be over." "No," Zachary said sharply. "That is not an option, but there might be another way." "What way?" Zachary took a deep breath. What he was about to suggest was bold, possibly crazy, but it was the only solution he could see. "Marry me." Nora stared at him. "What? Marry me?" Zachary repeated. "If you are married to someone else, he has no legal claim on you anymore. We find a preacher, make it official, and suddenly Robert Thorpe is just a man harassing another man's wife. That is something the sheriff can do something about." "Zachary, you cannot be serious. We have known each other less than a month. You cannot throw your life away like this." "Who says I am throwing it away?" Zachary asked. He reached out and took her hands, which were ice cold despite the warmth of the evening. "Nora, I have been drifting for years, running from ghosts and memories. Since I met you, I have felt more alive, more purposeful than I have in longer than I can remember. Maybe we have not known each other long by conventional standards, but I know enough. I know you are brave and strong. I know you make me want to be better. I know that when I am with you, I do not feel so lost anymore." Tears were streaming down Nora's face. "But a marriage should be about love, not just protection." Zachary met her eyes steadily. "Who says it is not about love?" The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Nora searched his face, looking for doubt or deception, but Zachary let her see the truth. He had fallen in love with her, somewhere between that first moment in the church and now. It had happened so gradually he had barely noticed until it was already complete, but there was no denying it anymore. "You love me?" Nora asked, her voice barely audible. "I do," Zachary said simply. I know it is fast, and I know I should probably have found a more romantic way to say it than as part of a plan to outsmart your violent husband, but yes, I love you, Nora." "I love you too," Nora said, and then she was in his arms, her face pressed against his chest as she sobbed. "I have been so afraid to admit it, even to myself. I thought maybe I was just grateful or confused, but it is more than that. When I am with you, I feel safe and happy and like myself again. I love you, Zachary Crawford." He held her tightly, one hand cradling the back of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. She smelled like soap and cooking spices and something essentially her, and he wanted to memorize every detail of this moment. "Then marry me," he said softly. "Not just for protection, though that is part of it. Marry me because we love each other and because I want to spend whatever time I have left on this earth making you happy." Nora pulled back just enough to look up at him. Her eyes were red from crying, but they shone with something that looked like hope. "Are you sure? Really sure? Once we do this, there is no taking it back." "I have never been more sure of anything," Zachary said, "but I need to know you are sure too. I do not want you to do this just because you are afraid of Robert or because you feel like you have no other choice." Nora stood up and Zachary stood with her. She placed her hands on either side of his face, looking at him with complete focus. "I am sure. I am terrified and this is crazy and we barely know each other, but I am sure. Yes, Zachary, I will marry you." He kissed her then, unable to hold back any longer. It was gentle at first, tentative, but when she responded, threading her fingers through his hair and pressing closer, it deepened into something that spoke of all the loneliness and longing they had both carried for too long. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "We should do it tomorrow, before Robert starts asking too many questions." "Tomorrow," Nora agreed. "But what about tonight? I am afraid to be alone. What if he comes back?" "I will stay," Zachary said immediately. "I will sleep in the chair, keep watch. You will be safe, I promise." "You do not have to sleep in the chair," Nora said quietly. "I trust you, and I just want to be held to feel safe for a few hours." Zachary nodded, understanding what she was offering and what she was not. They lay down together on the narrow bed, fully clothed, and he wrapped his arms around her. She fit against him perfectly, her back to his chest, and he could feel the gradual relaxation of her body as exhaustion and relief caught up with her. "Zachary," she murmured, already half asleep. "Yes, thank you for everything. For seeing me in that church, for taking my hand, for not walking away. Thank you for letting me stay," he said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Now sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a big day." The next morning, Zachary woke before dawn to find Nora still asleep in his arms, her breathing deep and even. For a moment, he just lay there, watching the gradual lightening of the sky through the small window and marveling at how much his life had changed in a few short weeks. Eventually, Nora stirred, her eyes opening slowly. When she saw him, she smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing Zachary had ever seen. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning. How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," Nora admitted. "I did not have a single nightmare." "Good." Zachary sat up reluctantly. "I should go back to my room, get cleaned up and changed. Then we need to find a preacher who will marry us without asking too many questions." "There is Reverend Patterson at the church," Nora said, sitting up as well. "He is a kind man. I think if we explain the situation, he will help us." An hour later, freshly washed and dressed in his cleanest shirt, Zachary met Nora at the church. She had put on a simple blue dress that brought out the warmth in her dark eyes, and she had pinned her hair up in a style that was both practical and pretty. She looked nervous but determined. Reverend Patterson was a thin man in his 60s, with wire-rimmed glasses and a gentle manner. He listened carefully as they explained the situation, his expression growing more troubled as Nora described her marriage to Robert Thorpe. "This is highly irregular," he said when they finished. "Marriage is a sacred covenant, not something to be entered into lightly or used as a legal maneuver." "With respect, Reverend," Zachary said, "we are not taking this lightly. I love Nora and she loves me. We want to build a life together. The fact that our marriage also protects her from a violent man is not the only reason we are doing this, but I would not pretend it is not part of our thinking." "And you, Miss Mercer," the Reverend asked, "are you certain this is what you want? You are not being coerced." "I am certain," Nora said firmly. "Zachary has shown me more kindness and respect in the past month than my first husband did in 5 years. I know this is fast, but sometimes you just know. I love him and I want to marry him." Reverend Patterson studied them both for a long moment. Finally, he sighed. "Very well, I will perform the ceremony, but I want you both to understand that marriage is about more than feelings or circumstances. It is about commitment, about choosing each other every day even when things are difficult. Can you promise me you understand that?" "Yes," they said together. "Then let us begin." The ceremony was simple and brief, just the three of them in the small chapel where Zachary and Nora had first met. There were no flowers, no music, no guests. But when Zachary took Nora's hand and spoke his vows, promising to love and cherish her for as long as they both lived, he meant every word with a depth of conviction that surprised even himself. Nora's vows were equally heartfelt, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. And when Reverend Patterson pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared felt like a promise of all the good things that might still be possible in a hard world. "Congratulations," the Reverend said, shaking their hands. "I will file the marriage certificate with the territorial office today. It should be official within the week." "Thank you, Reverend," Zachary said. "You have given us a precious gift." As they left the church, Nora slipped her hand into Zachary's. "What do we do now?" "Now we go about our day like normal," Zachary said. "You go to work, I go to the mine. But tonight we make sure Robert Thorpe knows you are no longer available. Do you think he will accept that?" "No," Zachary admitted. "But it gives us legal standing, and it might make him think twice about causing trouble." They parted ways at the restaurant, Zachary with a promise to return in the evening. As he walked toward the mine, he found himself smiling despite the danger they faced. He was married. He had a wife. The words felt strange and wonderful, and he repeated them silently to himself as he descended into the earth to spend another morning swinging a pickaxe. That evening, as Zachary was finishing his shift at the mine, one of the other workers mentioned that a well-dressed stranger had been around earlier, asking questions about new arrivals to town. Zachary's good mood evaporated instantly. Thorpe was not wasting time. He cleaned up quickly and headed to the restaurant, arriving just as the evening crowd was beginning to filter in. He spotted Nora through the window, carrying plates to tables with her usual efficiency. But he also spotted Robert Thorpe, seated at a table near the back, watching her with cold intensity. Zachary took a deep breath and walked inside. Nora saw him immediately, and he saw relief flash across her face. He crossed to her, and in a move that was as much about claiming as it was about comfort, he pulled her close and kissed her thoroughly. When he pulled back, he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "Hello, wife. How was your day?" Nora caught on immediately. "Better now that you are here, husband." "Are you hungry?" "Starving," Zachary said. "But first I need to have a word with that gentleman in the corner. I think he has been bothering you." He approached Thorpe's table with Nora at his side. Up close, he could see the rage simmering in the man's eyes, barely contained beneath a veneer of civility. "Good evening," Zachary said pleasantly. "I do not believe we were properly introduced yesterday. I am Zachary Crawford, and this is my wife, Nora Crawford." Thorpe stood slowly, his hands clenched into fists. "Your wife? That is impossible. This woman is my wife. Her name is Nora Thorpe, and she ran away from our home 8 months ago." "I am afraid you are mistaken," Nora said, her voice shaking slightly but clear. "I was never properly married to you, Robert. The ceremony we had was not legal, performed by a friend of yours who was not ordained. And even if it had been legal, I would have sought an annulment on the grounds of cruelty. But it does not matter now. I am married to Zachary, legally and properly." Reverend Patterson performed the ceremony this morning. It was a lie, or at least an embellishment. Zachary had no idea whether Nora's first marriage had been legal or not, but it sounded convincing, and that was what mattered. Thorpe's face flushed dark red. "You lying little whore," he snarled, reaching for Nora. Zachary moved faster, his hand shooting out to grab Thorpe's wrist in a grip like iron. "I would not do that if I were you. In fact, I suggest you sit down, calm yourself, and listen carefully to what I am about to tell you." "Take your hands off me," Thorpe hissed. "Sit down." Zachary's voice was low and deadly, carrying all the weight of the violence he was capable of if pushed. Something in his eyes must have convinced Thorpe, because the man slowly sank back into his chair. Zachary remained standing, looming over him. "Here is how this is going to work. You are going to finish your meal, pay your bill, and leave Clifton. If you ever come near my wife again, if you ever even speak her name, I will kill you. That is not a threat. It is a promise." "You cannot just steal another man's wife," Thorpe said, but some of the bluster had gone out of him. "I did not steal anything. Nora is her own person, and she made her choice. She chose me. Now you can accept that and move on with your life, or you can push this further and find out just how serious I am." "What is it going to be?" Thorpe looked between them, his expression twisted with hatred. But he must have seen something in Zachary's face that convinced him, because he threw some coins on the table and stood up. "This is not over," he said to Nora. "You belong to me. You always will." "No," Nora said firmly. "I belong to myself, and I choose to share my life with Zachary." "Goodbye, Robert." Thorpe stormed out of the restaurant, and the other diners, who had been watching the exchange with rapt attention, slowly returned to their meals. Nora swayed slightly, and Zachary steadied her. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I think so," Nora said. "I just cannot believe I actually stood up to him. I never thought I could do that." "You are braver than you know," Zachary said. "Come on. Let me help you finish your shift, and then let us go home." The word felt right. Home. Not a boarding house room or a space behind a restaurant, but an actual home that they would build together. But Thorpe did not leave town that night, or the next day. Instead, he took a room at the hotel and continued asking questions, making it clear he did not believe their story. Zachary stuck close to Nora, and Sheriff Winters kept a watchful eye on Thorpe, but the tension in the town was palpable. On the third day, Zachary woke to find a note slipped under his door at the boarding house. The message was brief and chilling. "Meet me at the north end of town at noon. Come alone, or I will make sure your wife suffers." Zachary crumpled the note, rage and fear warring in his chest. He knew it was a trap, knew that Thorpe planned either to kill him or to use him as leverage to get to Nora. But he could not risk ignoring the threat. He went to see Sheriff Winters, showed him the note. The lawman's face darkened. "This is a direct threat," Winters said. "I can arrest him for this. And he will post bail and be back on the street by evening, angrier than before," Zachary pointed out. "No, I need to handle this myself. But I wanted you to know, in case things go wrong, you are planning to meet him. I do not see that I have much choice." Winters was quiet for a moment, then opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a deputy's badge. "Then you are going to do it legally. Raise your right hand." "Sheriff, what are you doing? Making you a temporary deputy. That way, whatever happens, it is a lawman defending himself and others from a known threat. Now raise your hand and repeat after me." Zachary took the oath, feeling the weight of the badge as Winters pinned it to his shirt. It felt like both a shield and a burden. "Be careful," Winters said, "and try not to kill him if you can help it. I do not want to have to explain a body to the territorial marshal." "I will do my best," Zachary said. He did not tell Nora where he was going, just said he had some business to attend to. The worry in her eyes nearly undid his resolve, but he kissed her and promised to be back soon. The north end of town was mostly abandoned buildings, structures that had been started during the initial mining boom and then left unfinished when the easy copper played out. Thorpe was waiting near one of them, and Zachary saw immediately that he was not alone. Two rough-looking men flanked him, hired guns by the look of them. "I said come alone," Thorpe called out as Zachary approached. "You are one to talk," Zachary replied, his hand resting on his gun. "What do you want, Thorpe?" "I want what is mine. Send Nora to me and I will leave peacefully." "Refuse, and my friends here will make sure you do not leave at all." "That is a threat against a lawman," Zachary said, tapping the badge on his chest. "Sheriff Winters just deputized me, so whatever you are planning, you better think it through carefully." Thorpe's eyes narrowed. "That is a desperate move, Crawford, and it does not change anything. You have something that belongs to me, and I mean to take it back." "Nora is not a thing to be owned," Zachary said, "and she is never going back with you. So either draw that gun you have been reaching for, or get on your horse and ride out of here while you still can." For a moment, no one moved. Then one of the hired guns, a man with a scar running down his cheek, made the mistake of going for his weapon. Zachary drew and fired in one smooth motion, the product of years of practice and hard experience. The bullet caught the scarred man in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his gun flying. Before the second gunman could react, Zachary had already turned his aim toward him. "Drop it," Zachary said coldly. "I do not want to kill you, but I will if you give me no choice." The second gunman, clearly not being paid enough to die for Robert Thorpe, carefully lowered his weapon to the ground and raised his hands. Thorpe had stumbled backward, his face pale. He had not expected Zachary to be that fast, that capable. "You shot him," he said stupidly. "He drew first," Zachary said. "And you are next if you do not start talking sense. This is over, Thorpe. Nora is married to me legally and properly. She is not your wife anymore. Accept that and leave, or I will arrest you right now for threatening a lawman and hiring men to commit murder." "You cannot prove I hired them," Thorpe blustered. "I can testify that they were here with you, acting on your orders," Zachary said. "That will be enough for a judge." "Now what is it going to be?" Thorpe looked at his wounded hired gun who was clutching his shoulder and cursing, then at the second man who had clearly abandoned any loyalty he might have felt. Finally, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Fine," he said bitterly. "You win. Keep the faithless bitch. I do not want her anymore anyway." "Get out of Clifton," Zachary said. "And if I ever hear that you are within 100 miles of here, I will find you and finish this. Understood?" Thorpe did not answer, just turned and walked stiffly to his horse. He mounted and rode away without looking back, and Zachary felt tension he had not realized he was carrying finally begin to ease. Sheriff Winters arrived a few minutes later, having heard the gunshot. He looked at the wounded man, now being tended to by his companion, and raised an eyebrow at Zachary. "Self-defense," Zachary said. "He drew first. The other fellow can testify to that if he is smart." "That is right," the uninjured gunman said quickly. It was all self-defense. We are just going to collect our friend here and move on, if that is all right with you, Sheriff. Get out of my town, Winters said, and take Thorpe's money with you. I do not want to see any of you around here again. After they left, Winters clapped Zachary on the shoulder. Nice shooting. And I suppose Thorpe has decided to leave town. Seemed like the smart choice, Zachary said. I made it clear he was not welcome here. Good. Then I will take that badge back unless you are interested in making the position permanent. Zachary unpinned the badge and handed it over. Thank you, but I think I have had enough of official duties. I just want to focus on my wife and building a life here. Cannot say I blame you, Winters said. She is a good woman. You are lucky to have found each other. I know, Zachary said. Believe me, I know. He found Nora at the restaurant, anxiety clear on her face when he walked in. But when she saw he was unharmed, she nearly collapsed with relief. He told her what had happened and watched as years of fear finally began to lift from her shoulders. He is really gone. She asked as if afraid to believe it. He is really gone, Zachary confirmed. And he is not coming back. You are safe now, Nora, we both are. She threw her arms around him and he held her tight, right there in the middle of the restaurant with everyone watching. He did not care. This woman was his wife, his partner, his future. And he was going to spend the rest of his life making sure she never had to be afraid again. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Zachary's life. He and Nora settled into married life with surprising ease, moving into a small house at the edge of town that they rented from a miner who had decided to try his luck elsewhere. It was not much, just 2 rooms and a lean-to for cooking, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. Zachary continued working at the mine, though he had started saving money with the goal of eventually buying some land and raising horses. Nora kept her job at the restaurant, but now she worked with a lightness that had not been there before, smiling at customers and humming to herself as she moved through her tasks. They learned each other slowly, the way married couples do, discovering preferences and habits and the small intimacies that bind 2 lives together. Zachary learned that Nora liked to read before bed, that she had a sweet tooth for honey, and could not stand the taste of coffee. Nora learned that Zachary had nightmares sometimes, echoes of the war, and that the best way to help him was simply to hold him until he settled back into sleep. Their physical relationship developed gradually, both of them scarred by past experiences in different ways. But there was patience and tenderness between them, and slowly the barriers came down. The first time they made love, truly made love as husband and wife, Nora cried afterward, not from sadness, but from the revelation that such intimacy could be beautiful rather than something to be endured. I never knew it could be like this, she whispered against his chest as they lay tangled together in their narrow bed. I thought there was something wrong with me, that I was broken somehow. Robert always made it seem like my fault that I did not enjoy it. There is nothing wrong with you, Zachary said fiercely, kissing her forehead. He was the one who was broken, not you. What we have, this is how it is supposed to be. 2 people who love each other, sharing themselves. I love you so much, Nora said. Sometimes I am afraid I am going to wake up and find out this was all a dream. Not a dream, Zachary assured her. This is real. We are real. And I am not going anywhere. As autumn turned to winter, they built a life that felt increasingly solid and permanent. They made friends in town, became part of the community in ways that neither of them had expected. Nora joined the church choir, her clear soprano adding beauty to Sunday services. Zachary helped organize a volunteer fire brigade after a small blaze nearly destroyed the general store. They talked about the future, making plans that stretched years ahead. They wanted children eventually, though they agreed to wait a while, to give themselves time to be just the two of them before adding to their family. They dreamed of the ranch Zachary wanted to start, pictured the house they would build, with room for a growing family and maybe a garden for Nora. It was in early December, as the first real cold settled over Clifton, that Nora realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but she waited to be sure before telling Zachary. When she finally did, over dinner one evening, his face went through a rapid succession of emotions: shock, joy, fear, and wonder. "A baby," he said, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Nora said, smiling through happy tears. "I know we wanted to wait, but sometimes life has other plans. Are you happy?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Zachary said, coming around the table to pull her into his arms. "I am terrified and thrilled and about a dozen other things I do not have words for. But yes, I am happy. So happy." They held each other for a long time, swaying slightly in the lamplight while outside the first snow of winter began to fall. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Nora was sick most mornings and tired by early afternoon. Zachary fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more and work less, until she finally had to tell him firmly that she was pregnant, not dying, and he needed to let her live her life. But his concern came from love, and Nora could not truly be annoyed by it. After years of being treated as if she were worthless, having someone care so deeply for her well-being was still something of a revelation. In February, Zachary made the decision to leave the copper mine. The work was taking a toll on his body, and he wanted to be in a safer profession before the baby came. He took a job as a ranch hand at the spread north of town, the same one he had heard about on his first day in Clifton. The work was hard but honest, and the ranch owner, a gruff man named Samuel Morrison, took a liking to Zachary and promised to teach him everything he needed to know about raising horses. "You have a good hand with animals," Morrison said one afternoon as they worked together to break a young mare to saddle. "And you are not afraid of hard work. Stick with me for a few years, learn the business properly, and I will help you get started on your own place when you are ready." "I appreciate that, sir," Zachary said. "More than you know." "Call me Sam," Morrison said. "We do not stand on ceremony out here, and besides, we are going to be working together long enough that we might as well be on first-name terms." Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it transformed the harsh desert landscape into something briefly beautiful. Wildflowers bloomed in impossible profusion, painting the hills in shades of gold and purple and red. Nora, now heavily pregnant and moving with the careful deliberation of someone carrying precious cargo, liked to sit on the porch of their house in the evenings and watch the sunset paint the sky in colors she did not have names for. Zachary would sit beside her, his hand resting on her swollen belly, feeling their child move and kick. It filled him with a wonder he had not known he was capable of feeling. This tiny person, not yet born, already had him wrapped completely around its miniature fingers. "What do you want?" Nora asked one evening as they sat watching the sky fade from orange to purple. "A boy or a girl, I do not care," Zachary said honestly. "As long as the baby is healthy and you are all right, nothing else matters." "I think it is a boy," Nora said, smiling. "He kicks like a mule. Strong, just like his father." "Or maybe she is a girl who is going to grow up to be fierce and independent, just like her mother," Zachary countered. Nora laughed. "I suppose we will find out soon enough." The baby came on a warm night in early May, arriving with surprising speed after hours of labor that Zachary spent pacing outside the bedroom door, while Martha and the town's midwife attended to Nora. Her cries of pain nearly drove him mad with helplessness, But finally, just as dawn was breaking, he heard a new sound, the thin wail of a newborn. Martha opened the door, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Crawford, and your wife is asking for you." Zachary barely heard the rest of what she said, already pushing past her to get to Nora. She was propped up against pillows, pale and exhausted, but radiantly happy. And in her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was the smallest, most perfect human being Zachary had ever seen. "Come meet your son," Nora said softly. Zachary approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and looked down at the tiny face. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with dark, unfocused eyes, trying to make sense of this strange new world. He had a fuzz of dark hair and skin that was red and wrinkled, and Zachary thought he was absolutely beautiful. "Can I hold him?" Zachary asked. Nora carefully transferred the baby into his arms, showing him how to support the head. The weight was so slight, so fragile, that Zachary was terrified he might somehow break this precious thing. But the baby settled against his chest with a small sigh, and Zachary felt something in his heart expand until he thought it might burst. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your father. And I promise you, I am going to do everything in my power to give you a good life. You are going to know what it means to be loved, to be safe, to have parents who would move heaven and earth for you." "What should we name him?" Nora asked. They had discussed names for months but had not been able to decide. Now, looking at his son's face, Zachary knew exactly what the answer was. "William," he said. "William Thomas Crawford, after my father and your grandfather." "William," Nora repeated, trying it out. "I like it. William Crawford." "Welcome to the world, my darling boy." The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. William was a good baby, healthy and strong, though he had inherited his mother's tendency to wake early and his father's stubbornness. Zachary and Nora learned the rhythms of parenthood together, fumbling through those first weeks and gradually finding their footing. Zachary had never imagined himself as a father, had spent so many years alone that the idea of being responsible for another life had seemed impossible. But he took to it with surprising ease, rocking William to sleep in the middle of the night, changing diapers without complaint, making funny faces to elicit those first precious smiles. Nora blossomed as a mother, her natural warmth and tenderness finding full expression in caring for their son. She sang to him constantly, lullabies and hymns and songs she made up on the spot, and William would lie in her arms with an expression of perfect contentment. As William grew, so did their dreams for the future. Zachary had continued saving every spare penny, and by the time William was a year old, they had enough for a down payment on a small piece of land west of town. It was not much, just 20 acres of scrubland with a creek running through it, but it was theirs. They spent weekends out there, Zachary beginning the slow process of building a house, while Nora planned where the garden would go and where they would eventually build corrals for horses. William, now walking and getting into everything, tottered around the property with the fearlessness of the very young, and they had to watch him constantly to make sure he did not tumble into the creek or pick up a scorpion. "This is it," Zachary said one Sunday afternoon as they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree, watching William chase butterflies through the scrub grass. "This is the life I want, not riches or glory or any of the things I thought mattered when I was young, just this. You, our son, a piece of land to call our own. It is more than I ever dreamed I would have." "It is everything," Nora agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "Sometimes I think about where I was 2 years ago, how lost and afraid I was. And then I think about that day in the church when you knelt beside me and took my hand. That was the moment everything changed. You saved me, Zachary. We saved each other," Zachary corrected gently. "I was just as lost as you were, maybe more. But we found something together that neither of us could have found alone. We found home." William chose that moment to come running back to them, his chubby hands clutching a handful of wildflowers that he presented to his mother with great ceremony. Nora accepted them with appropriate solemnity, kissing his dirt-smudged cheek and declaring them the most beautiful flowers she had ever seen. Zachary watched them together, his heart so full of love it almost hurt. This was what it was all for, he thought. All the pain and struggle, all the years of wandering and searching. It had all been leading to this moment, this family, this life. Over the next few years, their little ranch slowly took shape. The house was completed, a sturdy two-story structure with room to grow as their family expanded. They built corrals and a small barn, and Zachary brought home their first horses, 2 mares that he planned to breed. Sam Morrison had been as good as his word, teaching Zachary everything he knew about horse breeding and training, and even helping him make connections with buyers. When William was 3, Nora became pregnant again. This time she was less sick but more tired, and Zachary insisted she cut back on her work at the restaurant. She agreed reluctantly, knowing they needed the income, but trusting that Zachary would provide for them. Their second child, a daughter they named Caroline Rose, arrived on a crisp October morning. She was smaller than William had been, with her mother's delicate features and her father's serious eyes. William, now old enough to understand that he had a baby sister, was fascinated by her, wanting to help with everything from feeding to changing, though his help was not always actually helpful. "Gentle," Nora would remind him as he patted Caroline's head with the same enthusiasm he used to pet the barn cats. "She is very little. You have to be soft." "I am being soft," William would insist, though Nora and Zachary would exchange amused glances over his head. With 2 children and a growing business, life was busier than ever. But it was a good kind of busy, the kind that came from building something meaningful rather than just surviving. Zachary's horse breeding operation was beginning to develop a reputation for quality animals, and he had more buyers than he could supply. They hired help. A young man named James who was good with horses and did not mind the hard work. He lived in a small room they had built onto the barn, and he quickly became part of the family, eating dinner with them most nights and playing with the children. Nora had stopped working at the restaurant entirely, her time consumed with managing the household and caring for 2 young children. But she did not miss it. She had found her calling as a mother and a rancher's wife, and she threw herself into both roles with enthusiasm. She grew vegetables in her garden, more than they could eat, and she traded the surplus with neighbors for other goods. She learned to preserve food for the winter, filling their cellar with jars of beans and tomatoes and peaches. She made their clothes, sewed quilts, and somehow found time to bake bread that was the envy of every woman in Clifton. They attended church every Sunday, the whole family dressed in their best, and Zachary would watch Nora sing in the choir while William fidgeted beside him and Caroline slept in his arms. Those moments felt sacred in a way that had nothing to do with the sermon or the hymns. They were about family, about belonging, about the life they had built together from nothing. When William was 6 and Caroline 3, Nora became pregnant once more. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2, and Zachary worried constantly. But Nora remained calm, trusting in her body and in God's plan. And in the summer of 1885, she gave birth to twin boys. The arrival of James and Joseph, named after Zachary's grandfather and Nora's father, threw the household into joyful chaos. 2 babies were exponentially more work than 1, and even with Zachary and James helping, Nora was exhausted most of the time. But she remained cheerful, laughing at the impossibility of ever getting both babies to nap at the same time and marveling at how different their personalities were even from the beginning. James was quiet and watchful, content to lie in his cradle and observe the world around him. Joseph was loud and demanding, wanting to be held constantly and making his displeasure known when his needs were not met immediately. "He is going to be a handful," Zachary said one night as he walked a fussy Joseph around the bedroom while Nora fed James. "They are both going to be handfuls," Nora said, but she was smiling. "All our children are. I wonder where they get it from." "Must be your side of the family," Zachary teased, and Nora threw a pillow at him, which he caught one-handed while Joseph continued to wail. Despite the exhaustion and the chaos, those years were golden. The ranch prospered, and they were able to pay off the land and begin saving for expansion. William started school in town, making friends and learning his letters with enthusiasm. Caroline was growing into a smart, spirited little girl who loved helping her mother in the garden, and had already declared her intention to be a horse trainer like her father. The twins grew like weeds, turning from helpless infants into mischievous toddlers who got into everything and made it impossible to leave anything breakable within reach. But even in the midst of the exhaustion and mess, Zachary and Nora would sometimes catch each other's eyes across the dinner table or over a pile of laundry, and they would smile, sharing a moment of gratitude for the abundance of their life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary surprised Nora with a trip to Tucson. They left the children with Martha and Sam Morrison, who had become like family over the years, and took the stagecoach south to the city. It was their first time away from the children, their first time alone together since the twins had been born, and it felt strange and wonderful. They stayed in a real hotel, ate in restaurants, and walked through streets that seemed impossibly sophisticated compared to Clifton. On their last evening there, as they sat on the balcony of their hotel room watching the sun set over the distant mountains, Zachary took Nora's hand. "I have been thinking about that day in the church," he said, "when I saw you praying alone, and I knelt beside you and took your hand. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had just walked away?" "Every day," Nora admitted. "And every day I thank God that you did not. You changed my life, Zachary. You gave me everything I have now, this family, this home, this happiness." "We gave it to each other," Zachary said. "I was as broken as you were, just in different ways. But somehow, together, we made something whole. We built this life together, and I would not change a single moment of it." "Not even the twins keeping us up all night?" Nora asked with a laugh. "Not even that," Zachary said firmly. "Every sleepless night, every worry, every challenge, it has all been worth it. Because it brought us here to this moment, with 4 beautiful children and a future that looks brighter than I ever imagined possible." "I love you," Nora said, leaning in to kiss him. "I loved you that day in the church, though I did not know it yet, and I love you more with every day that passes." "I love you too," Zachary said. "Always." They returned to Clifton refreshed and ready to dive back into the beautiful chaos of their life. The children were overjoyed to see them, and the house felt complete again with all of them under one roof. The years continued to pass, marked by the usual milestones of a growing family. William grew into a serious, responsible young man who worked beside his father and dreamed of expanding their operation. Caroline remained fierce and independent, announcing at 12 that she had no intention of ever marrying because men were more trouble than they were worth, though Zachary suspected she would change her mind about that eventually. The twins grew into inseparable companions, finishing each other's sentences and getting into trouble that neither would have attempted alone. When Zachary was in his late 40s, Sam Morrison, offered to sell him a portion of his ranch, including prime grazing land and water rights. It was an opportunity too good to pass up, and though it stretched their finances to the limit, they managed it. The Crawford Ranch became one of the largest horse breeding operations in the territory, known for producing animals that were strong, intelligent, and even-tempered. Zachary hired more help, including 2 families who came west looking for work, and he built houses for them on the property. The ranch became a small community unto itself, with children playing together and the adults sharing meals and helping each other through hard times. Nora became the heart of that community, the person everyone turned to when they needed advice or comfort or just someone to listen. She had come so far from the frightened woman praying alone in a chapel, and Zachary sometimes had to remind himself that they had only been together for a little more than 2 decades. It felt like a lifetime, like they had always been together. When William was 20, he married a girl named Sarah from a neighboring ranch, and Zachary and Nora became grandparents for the first time when Sarah gave birth to a boy they named Zachary, after his grandfather. Holding that baby, seeing his son experience the overwhelming love and terror of fatherhood, Zachary felt the circle of life complete itself in a way that was both humbling and joyful. Caroline did eventually marry, though not until she was 25, to a horse trader from California who appreciated her spirit and made her laugh. The twins, true to their contrary nature, both remained stubbornly single well into their 20s, declaring they were too busy building their own horse trading business to worry about wives. As Zachary and Nora grew older, their hair turning gray and their bodies slowing down, they began to hand over more and more of the daily operations of the ranch to their children. It was not retirement exactly, but a gradual stepping back, a recognition that they had built something strong enough to outlast them. They spent their days in quieter pursuits, Nora tending her garden and Zachary working with the younger horses, teaching them the patience and gentleness he had learned over a lifetime. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch of the house they had built together, watching their grandchildren play in the yard and marveling at how full their life had become. "You ever regret it?" Nora asked one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Taking a chance on a frightened woman praying alone in a chapel, Zachary looked at her, this woman who had been his partner, his love, his best friend for more than 30 years. He saw the lines on her face, the silver in her hair, and he thought she had never been more beautiful. "Not for a single second," he said firmly. "That was the best decision I ever made. Everything good in my life started the moment I knelt beside you and took your hand." "Mine too," Nora said softly. She reached for his hand now, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "We built something good, did we not?" "We built something wonderful," Zachary corrected. "A family, a home, a legacy that will outlast both of us. I could not ask for more." They sat in companionable silence as the stars began to emerge one by one in the darkening sky. From inside the house, they could hear laughter and voices as their children and grandchildren gathered for dinner. The smell of roasting meat and fresh bread drifted out to them, along with the sounds of life and love and family. This was their legacy, Zachary thought. Not land or horses or money, though they had all those things. Their true legacy was the love they had built together, starting from nothing but hope and faith, and the simple act of 2 wounded people reaching out to each other in a moment of need. He had been a drifter, a man without purpose or direction, running from ghosts and memories. She had been a woman escaping violence, alone and afraid in a hostile world. Together, they had created something neither could have imagined. A life filled with love and laughter and the kind of deep satisfaction that comes from building something meaningful with your own hands and heart. As the years continued to pass, Zachary and Nora watched their family expand even further. More grandchildren arrived, filling the house with noise and energy. The ranch continued to prosper under William's steady leadership, and Caroline's husband proved to have a brilliant mind for business, helping to expand their markets and increase their profits. The twins, James and Joseph, finally settled down in their 30s, Joseph marrying a school teacher from Tucson and James falling for a widow with 2 children of her own. Both couples built houses on the ranch property, keeping the family close and ensuring that there would always be Crawfords working the land. When Zachary was in his 60s, his body finally beginning to show the accumulated wear of a lifetime of hard work, he and Nora took to spending their afternoons in the small chapel in Clifton, the same one where they had first met. It had been rebuilt and expanded over the years, but the essence of it remained the same, a quiet place of peace and reflection. They would sit in the front pew, the same spot where Zachary had knelt beside a praying woman and changed both their lives forever, and they would hold hands and simply be together. Sometimes they prayed, sometimes they just sat in silence, but always they were connected, 2 souls that had found each other against all odds. Reverend Patterson had long since retired, replaced by a younger minister who knew the Crawford family's story and treated them with respect and affection. He often said that their marriage was proof of God's grace, an example of how something beautiful could grow from the seeds of fear and desperation. On the afternoon of their 40th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Tables were set up under the cottonwood trees, laden with food that Nora and her daughters and daughters-in-law had been preparing for days. Children ran everywhere, ranging from teenagers down to toddlers barely steady on their feet. The ranch hands joined in, these people who had become extended family over the years. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, William stood and called for everyone's attention. The crowd quieted, and he raised his glass. 40 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the gathered assembly, my father made the best decision of his life. He walked into a chapel in Clifton and saw a woman praying alone. And instead of walking past, instead of minding his own business like most men would have, he knelt beside her and took her hand. That single act of compassion and courage changed everything. It created this family, this ranch, this life that we all share. So I want to propose a toast to my parents, to Zachary and Nora Crawford, to 40 years of love and partnership, and showing us all what it means to build a life together. May we all be so lucky. To Zachary and Nora, the crowd echoed, raising their glasses. Zachary looked at Nora and saw tears streaming down her face, though she was smiling. He put his arm around her and pulled her close, and the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Later, as the party continued around them, Zachary and Nora slipped away, walking hand in hand toward the creek that ran through their property. The sound of celebration faded behind them, replaced by the gentle burble of water over stones and the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. Can you believe it has been 40 years? Nora asked, leaning against Zachary's shoulder as they stood on the bank. Some days it feels like yesterday, Zachary said. Other days it feels like we have always been together, like there was never a time before us. I was so lost that day, Nora said quietly. So sure that my life was over, that I had ruined everything and there was no way back. And then you appeared, this stranger who had no reason to care, and you showed me that there was still hope, still a future worth living for. I was lost too, Zachary admitted. I had been running for so long I had forgotten what it felt like to have a reason to stop. But when I saw you there, something in me just knew. This is where I am supposed to be. This is who I am supposed to be with. It was not logical or reasonable, but it was true. The best things in life rarely are logical, Nora said. She turned to face him fully, reaching up to cup his weathered face in her hands. I love you, Zachary Crawford. I have loved you since that day in the chapel, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Zachary said, covering her hands with his own. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. This life we have built, these children and grandchildren, this home, it is all because you trusted me when you had no reason to, because you took a chance on a drifter who had nothing to offer but a promise to protect you. You offered me everything, Nora corrected. You offered me hope and safety and love. You offered me a future when I thought I had none, and you have kept that promise every single day for 40 years. They kissed then, a soft, sweet kiss that held all the tenderness and passion of 4 decades together. In the distance, they could hear their family laughing and celebrating, the sound of the life they had created together carrying on the evening air. As they walked back to the party, Zachary thought about the younger man he had been, the one who had ridden into Clifton with no plan beyond finding the next job, the next town, the next escape from his own thoughts. That man had been empty, hollowed out by war and loss and years of aimless wandering. But that man had also been capable of a single moment of compassion, of reaching out to someone in need despite his own pain. And that moment had changed everything. He looked at Nora, still beautiful to him after all these years, her face lined with age but her eyes still bright with the intelligence and spirit that had first captured his heart. He looked at their children and grandchildren, at the ranch they had built from nothing, at the community of people who had become family. This was his legacy. Not just the land or the horses or the business, but the love. The choice he had made, again and again, every day for 40 years, to stay, to build, to be present and committed and true to the woman walking beside him. They lived for many more years, Zachary and Nora, watching their grandchildren grow and have children of their own. They saw the ranch continue to expand and prosper, becoming one of the most respected horse breeding operations in Arizona. They saw their children grow old themselves, gray and weathered but still strong, carrying on the traditions and values that Zachary and Nora had instilled in them. When Zachary finally passed, at the age of 78, he died in his sleep with Nora beside him, holding his hand just as he had held hers that first day in the chapel. His last conscious thought was one of gratitude for the life he had lived, for the woman he had loved, for the family they had created together. Nora followed him 6 months later, unable to exist in a world without her other half. She died peacefully, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and her last words were a request to be buried beside Zachary, so they could be together even in death. They were laid to rest in a small cemetery on the ranch, under the cottonwood trees they had planted together when they first bought the land. Their graves sat side by side, the headstones simple but elegant, inscribed with their names and the dates of their birth and death, and beneath that, a single line: together in life and in death, forever in love. The Crawford Ranch continued for generations after they were gone, a testament to what two people could build when they chose love over fear, commitment over running, hope over despair. And in Clifton, in the small chapel where it all began, there hung a plaque that told the story of the cowboy who saw a woman praying alone, who knelt beside her and took her hand, and in doing so, found his home. Their great-grandchildren still lived on the land, raising horses and telling stories of the ancestors who had started it all. They spoke of Zachary's courage and Nora's strength, of the love that had sustained them through decades of challenges and triumphs. They kept the memory alive, ensuring that future generations would know where they came from and what it had cost to build the life they now enjoyed. On clear summer evenings, when the work was done and the family gathered on the porch of the big house, you could almost feel their presence, Zachary and Nora, watching over the legacy they had created. Their love had been the foundation upon which everything else was built, and it endured, solid and true, long after they were gone. This was the story of two broken people who found each other in a moment of grace, who chose to build rather than run, to love rather than fear, to believe that tomorrow could be better than yesterday. It was a story of redemption and hope, of second chances, and the transformative power of simple human kindness. It was a love story, pure and true, set against the harsh beauty of the American West, and it proved that even in the hardest of times and places, love could not only survive but flourish, creating something beautiful and lasting that would echo through the generations. And it all began with a single act of compassion. A cowboy kneeling beside a praying woman and taking her hand, offering comfort to a stranger and finding, in return, everything he had been searching for all along.